a vet found a dying puppy on a stormy night. But when he washed it, he screamed, "Lock down the building!" What looked like a helpless stray wasn't what it seemed at all. Scars hidden beneath the fur told a story of cruelty. A hidden device revealed a dangerous secret. And suddenly, the quiet clinic became the center of something far darker than anyone could imagine. As strangers pound on the door demanding their property, one question hangs in the air. What exactly did he uncover? And why are powerful men willing to risk everything to get it back? Your presence here is powerful. In a world full of noise, it's the quiet gestures of compassion that truly stand out. If your heart still makes room for kindness, you're already one of us. The Montana wind howled outside the small veterinary clinic as Dr. Curtis Brandt wiped down the last examination table of the day. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain pelted against the windows like tiny fists demanding entry. The clock on the wall showed 7:30 in the evening, well past closing time. His shoulders ached from a long day of treating everything from arthritic farm cats to colicky horses. Curtis ran a hand through his graying hair, feeling every one of his 45 years. The quiet solitude of his rural practice usually brought him peace, but tonight the storm made the empty clinic feel especially lonely. He thought about heading home to his empty house, where memories of Sarah still lingered in every room, even 3 years after the accident that took her from him. The sudden bang of the front door flying open made him jump. Cold wind and rain gusted into the waiting room, along with a small, soaking, wet figure clutching something dark against his chest. "Please, please help!" The boy's voice cracked with desperation. "I found him in the alley. He's not moving." Curtis rushed forward as the boy, he couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, stumbled toward him. In the boy's arms was a mud-covered, motionless bundle of fur. "Here, bring him this way quickly." Curtis guided the boy into the nearest exam room, flipping on extra lights. "I'm Dr. Brandt. What's your name?" Caleb Rios." The boy's dark hair was plastered to his forehead, his wide eyes full of tears. Is he dead?" "Let's take a look." Curtis gently took the limp animal and laid it on the examination table. Through the caked mud and matted fur, he could barely make out what appeared to be a puppy. Its chest moved with shallow, labored breaths. "He's alive, but barely. Can you tell me where exactly you found him?" While Caleb described the alley behind Mario's Pizza, Curtis worked quickly to assess the animal's condition. He listened to its heart and lungs, checked for obvious injuries, and started an IV line to combat what appeared to be severe dehydration. "Temperature's dangerously low," Curtis muttered, more to himself than to Caleb. He grabbed warming blankets from a nearby cabinet. "Sandra!" he called out to his technician, who he knew was still finishing paperwork in the back. "I need help in here." Sandra appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with professional efficiency. "What do you need, Doc?" "Warm fluids, heating pads, and the portable oxygen setup." Curtis was already cutting away clumps of mud-soaked fur to better access the animal's vital signs. "This little guy's in rough shape." As Sandra rushed to gather supplies, Curtis noticed Caleb hovering anxiously nearby, dripping water onto the floor. "There are some clean towels in that bottom cabinet," he told the boy. "Why don't you dry yourself off a bit?" For the next 20 minutes, Curtis and Sandra worked steadily to stabilize their patient. Gradually, the animal's breathing became stronger and more regular. Its body temperature slowly climbed toward normal range. "Good boy," Curtis murmured, stroking one of the few clean patches of fur he'd managed to expose. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" With the immediate crisis passing, Curtis began the methodical process of cleaning away the layers of mud and grime. Caleb stayed close, handing over fresh towels and asking questions about everything Curtis was doing. The boy's genuine concern and curiosity reminded Curtis painfully of himself at that age, when he'd first dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. As more of the animal's true appearance emerged from beneath the dirt, Curtis felt his initial assumptions shifting. What he'd taken for a medium-sized mixed-breed puppy was revealing itself to be something else entirely. The body structure, the ear shape, the distinctive facial features. This was no random stray. "This is a German Shepherd," he said slowly, his experienced hands finding telltale scars beneath the fur. These weren't the typical marks of street life or accidents. They were deliberate, systematic, the kind of scars that came from brutal training methods. A sick feeling began growing in his stomach. "But he's so skinny," Caleb protested, "and he was just lying there in the alley, all alone." "Help me turn him over," Curtis instructed, keeping his voice calm despite his rising concern. As they carefully rolled the dog onto its side, Curtis parted the fur along its ribcage. There, barely visible against the skin, was exactly what he'd feared he might find. A small brand, the kind used to mark valuable working dogs. "Sandra!" he called out, his tone making her look up sharply from where she was preparing additional medications. "Get me the scanner, please." The handheld scanner chirped as Curtis ran it over the dog's body. Near the base of the neck, it detected something that definitely wasn't a standard microchip. With careful fingers, he probed the area until he found what he was looking for, a small, sophisticated transmitter surgically implanted beneath the skin. The implications hit him like a physical blow. This was no abandoned pet. This was a highly trained military or law enforcement dog, one that someone had deliberately subjected to severe abuse. And now that same someone would be able to track it directly to his clinic. "Lock the doors," he ordered Sandra, his voice tight with urgency. "All of them. Now." "Dr. Brandt?" Caleb's voice quavered. "What's wrong?" Curtis looked down at the boy's worried face, then at the German Shepherd lying vulnerable on his table. The storm continued to rage outside, but suddenly the weather seemed like the least of their problems. The safe haven of his small-town clinic had become something else entirely, a target. "This dog," he explained carefully, "is very special, Caleb. And I think some very bad people are probably looking for him." He moved to the windows, pulling the blinds closed. "We need to be careful." Sandra returned from securing the building. "Doors are locked, Doc. Should I call the sheriff?" Curtis hesitated. Without knowing exactly what or who they were dealing with, involving law enforcement might only make things worse. If this dog had been deliberately damaged and dumped, there was likely corruption involved somewhere up the chain. "Not yet," he decided. "First, we need to figure out exactly what we're dealing with." He turned back to the examination table, where the German Shepherd's breathing had grown stronger. Despite everything that had clearly been done to it, the dog had a fighter's spirit. Curtis felt his own resolve strengthening in response. "Caleb, I need you to tell me everything you can remember about where and how you found him. Every detail could be important." As the boy began describing the scene again, Curtis continued his examination with new purpose, documenting every scar and injury he found. Whatever darkness this dog had escaped from, Curtis was determined it wouldn't claim another victim. Not in his clinic, not tonight. The wind howled louder outside, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again across the Montana sky. But inside the clinic, 3 unlikely allies, a wounded veterinarian, a brave young boy, and a brutalized German Shepherd, had found themselves drawn together by fate and compassion. None of them could know it yet, but their lives had just become irrevocably intertwined. Sandra moved efficiently around the room, securing cabinets and double-checking windows while maintaining a careful eye on their patients' vital signs. The steady beep of monitoring equipment provided a rhythmic counterpoint to the storm's chaos outside. "His temperature's coming up nicely," she reported, adjusting one of the warming blankets. "Heart rate and oxygen levels are stabilizing too." Curtis nodded absently, his attention focused on carefully documenting every mark and injury he found on the dog's body. The pattern that emerged told a story of systematic abuse. Pressure points targeted to cause maximum pain without visible damage, strategic stress positions, and signs of electrical burns carefully hidden under fur. What kind of people would do this? Caleb whispered, his young face troubled as he watched Curtis work. The boy hadn't left the dog's side since they'd started treatment. Sometimes people do terrible things when they think the end justifies the means. Curtis answered carefully, trying to balance honesty with sensitivity to Caleb's age. But what matters now is that he's safe with us. The German Shepherd's eyes flickered open briefly, deep brown eyes that held far too much intelligence and pain for Curtis to maintain contact for long. He'd treated thousands of animals over his career, but something about this dog's gaze struck straight through his professional detachment to the raw place in his heart that had never quite healed after Sarah's death. "We need to remove this transmitter," he announced, straightening up. "Sandra, prepare for a minor surgical procedure. Local anesthetic only. I want him to stay conscious and stable." "Are you sure that's wise, Doc?" Sandra asked, even as she moved to gather the necessary supplies. "If it's as sophisticated as you think, tampering with it might trigger some kind of alert." "It probably will," Curtis agreed grimly. "But leaving it in place just gives them a perfect tracking beacon straight to us. Better to deal with it now, on our terms." As Sandra prepared the surgical site, Curtis took Caleb aside. "You've been very brave tonight," he told the boy seriously. "But things might get complicated, and I need to know how to contact your parents. They must be worried sick about you being out in this storm." "It's just my mum," Caleb said, glancing down at his feet. "She works the late shift at the diner. She won't be home until midnight." He looked back up at Curtis, jaw set stubbornly. "I'm not leaving him." Curtis recognized that particular brand of 11-year-old determination. It was the same steel he'd seen in the boy's eyes when he'd first burst through the clinic doors, desperate to save what he thought was just an injured puppy. "All right," he conceded. "But I want you to text your mum right now. Tell her where you are and that you're safe. And Caleb?" He waited until the boy met his eyes again. "Thank you for bringing him to us. You probably saved his life tonight." While Caleb sent the text, Curtis returned to the examination table where Sandra had everything prepared. The German Shepherd was more alert now, watching them with wary intelligence but remaining surprisingly still as Curtis administered the local anesthetic. "Good boy," Curtis murmured as he worked, keeping his movements slow and telegraphed. "Just a small pinch, then we'll get this thing out of you. You're doing great." The procedure itself was straightforward. Curtis had removed plenty of microchips and other implants over the years, but the technology of this transmitter was like nothing he'd ever seen. The casing was sleek and military-grade, with no identifying marks or serial numbers. "What should we do with it?" Sandra asked once the transmitter was safely extracted. Curtis studied the tiny device, barely larger than his thumbnail, but representing so much potential danger. "Put it in a specimen container for now. We'll figure out how to dispose of it safely once we've—" A sharp crack of thunder made them all jump. The lights flickered ominously, and the German Shepherd's ears pricked forward, suddenly alert. Outside, barely audible over the storm, came the sound of tires on wet gravel. Curtis's mind raced as he processed what they'd discovered. A fighting dog, deliberately disguised and abandoned. It made his stomach turn. He looked at Caleb, who hadn't left Rex's side. "Caleb, I need you to tell me exactly how you found him," Curtis said gently, keeping his voice steady despite his growing concern. The boy stroked Rex's fur carefully, avoiding the worst of the scars. "I was walking home from the store when I saw this big black pickup truck. 2 men were pushing something out the back door. They drove off real fast, and when I went to look..." Caleb's voice cracked. He was just lying there in the dirt. Curtis nodded slowly, his weathered hands checking Rex's vitals again. The German Shepherd's breathing had stabilized, but the dog's eyes remained alert despite its weakness. Even injured, there was an unmistakable discipline in how the animal held itself, the kind that came from intensive training. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" Caleb whispered to the dog. "I think I'll call you Rex. Is that okay?" To Curtis's surprise, the dog's tail thumped weakly against the examination table. Despite everything this animal had been through, it still responded to kindness. "Dr. Brandt," Sarah called from the front, her voice tight with worry. "There's a truck pulling up outside." Curtis's heart dropped as bright headlights flooded through the clinic's windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The same black truck Caleb had described. Heavy boots crunched on gravel, followed by aggressive pounding on the front door. "Open up!" a gruff voice demanded. "We know our property's in there!" Curtis moved quickly, positioning himself between the examination room and the front door. "Caleb, stay with Rex," he instructed firmly. "Sarah, call the sheriff." The pounding continued. Through the door's window, Curtis could make out two hard-faced men in dark jackets. Their expressions promised trouble. "This is private property," Curtis called out. "We're closed." "That's our dog you've got in there," the taller man snarled. "Military-trained German Shepherd. Ran off this afternoon. We tracked him here." Curtis felt his jaw tighten. The transmitter. Of course, they'd followed it. "This animal shows signs of severe abuse," he replied. "As a veterinarian, I'm obligated to report cases of animal cruelty." The shorter man stepped forward, his face inches from the door glass. "Listen carefully, Doc. You don't want to make enemies here. That dog is valuable property, and we've got papers to prove it. Hand him over, and we all go home happy." Curtis stood his ground, even as fear crept up his spine. "Any papers you have won't explain the fighting scars or the illegal tracker. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." The men exchanged dark looks. The taller one pointed at Curtis through the glass. "You're making a big mistake, Doc. This isn't over." They backed away slowly, their threat hanging in the air like smoke. The black truck's engine roared to life, and headlights swept across the clinic one last time before the vehicle disappeared into the night. Curtis released a shaky breath, his heart pounding. In the examination room, Rex watched the door intently, his ears forward despite his weakness. The dog's alert posture confirmed what Curtis already knew. Those men were definitely not Rex's legitimate owners. "Are they gone?" Caleb asked quietly, his hand still resting on Rex's fur. "For now," Curtis replied, knowing with grim certainty that by refusing to hand over Rex, he'd just made some very dangerous enemies. Whatever dark business these men were involved in, they wouldn't give up easily. And now, they knew exactly where to find him. Curtis paced the clinic floor, his mind churning with dark possibilities. The threat those men had left behind hung heavy in the air, mixing with the antiseptic smell of the examination room. Through the window he could see Caleb still sitting with Rex, the boy's small hand gentle on the German Shepherd's scarred head. Something about the dog's injuries nagged at his memory. Over the past year, he'd heard whispers at the local diner, fragments of conversations about missing dogs and late-night gatherings in abandoned barns. At the time, he'd dismissed them as small-town gossip. Now those whispers took on a more sinister tone. "Caleb," Curtis called softly, walking back into the exam room. "I need you to tell me more about what happened when you found Rex. Every detail matters." The boy's fingers tightened slightly in Rex's fur. "They were laughing," he said, his voice small but clear. "When they pushed him out of the truck, like it was funny to leave him hurt like that." Curtis felt his jaw clench. "How many men were there?" "3. The 2 who came here, plus another one driving." Caleb's eyes stayed fixed on Rex. They had weird symbols on their jackets, like lightning bolts. That detail made Curtis's blood run cold. He'd seen similar symbols spray-painted on abandoned buildings at the edge of town. Walking to his office, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he'd never used before. "Deputy Hayes." A crisp female voice answered. "This is Dr. Curtis Brandt from the veterinary clinic. I need to report something complicated." There was a pause on the line. "The same Dr. Brandt who refused to sign off on those suspicious livestock deaths last spring." "The very same," Curtis confirmed, remembering how he'd rejected pressure to falsify cause of death on several farm animals. I'm listening, Deputy Hayes said. Curtis explained the situation: the tracked fighting dog, the threatening men, the frightened boy who'd witnessed too much. As he spoke, he could hear her taking notes. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said finally. "Don't let anyone in until I arrive." True to her word, Deputy Lorna Hayes pulled up exactly 15 minutes later in an unmarked car. She was younger than Curtis had expected, but her sharp green eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the clinic's exterior before entering. "Show me the dog," were her first words. Curtis led her to the examination room. Rex lifted his head as they entered, assessing the new arrival with intelligent eyes. Deputy Hayes approached slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. "Easy, boy," she murmured, letting Rex catch her scent. After a moment, she began examining his scars with practiced hands. "These patterns. I've seen them before. The spacing matches photos from fighting pits we've raided." She straightened up, her expression grim. 3 months ago, we found a similar dog dumped outside town. He didn't make it. The cases are connected, I'm sure of it." "To what?" Curtis asked, though he already suspected the answer. "There's a dogfighting syndicate operating across 3 counties. Hayes explained. "We've been trying to shut them down for months, but they're well protected. Someone powerful is keeping them safe." She looked at Rex thoughtfully. "This dog could be our first real evidence." "He's not evidence," Caleb protested suddenly. "He's Rex, and he needs help." Deputy Hayes knelt beside the boy. "You're right, he does need help. And helping him means making sure the bad men who hurt him can't hurt any other dogs. Will you help us do that?" Caleb nodded solemnly. "Good." Hayes stood, addressing Curtis. "Doctor, I need you to document everything. Every scar, every injury. Photograph it all. Rex is living proof of what these monsters are doing." "What about Caleb?" Curtis asked. "Those men saw him here. I'll have a patrol car watching his house," Hayes assured him. "But you're right. Both he and Rex are targets now. We'll need to be careful." Curtis ran a hand through his graying hair. "I have a spare apartment above the clinic. They could stay here tonight, at least until we figure out our next move." Hayes nodded approvingly. "I'll make some calls, set up protection. But Dr. Brandt..." She fixed him with a steady gaze. "Are you sure you want to be involved in this? These people are dangerous." Curtis looked at Caleb, still protecting Rex with his small presence, then at the German shepherd who'd already endured so much cruelty. The answer was clear. "I'm already involved," he said firmly. "Whatever you need, Deputy Hayes, I'm in." "Lorna," she corrected, offering her hand. "I think we're past formalities." As they shook hands, Curtis felt the weight of their unspoken agreement. They were no longer just a veterinarian and a deputy. They were allies in something much bigger and more dangerous than either had anticipated. Thunder crackled overhead as darkness settled around the clinic. Curtis paced near the windows, checking the locks for the 10th time. The old building creaked and groaned in the wind, making him jump at every sound. "Maybe we should try to sleep," Caleb suggested from his makeshift bed on the waiting room couch. Rex lay beside him, head resting on the boy's leg. "Good idea," Curtis agreed, though sleep felt impossible. He'd given Caleb his old emergency blanket, the one he kept for late-night calls to farms. The sight of the boy and dog huddled together made his heart ache. The phone rang, startling them all. Curtis reached for it, but the line was dead. Just static. He tried dialing out, nothing. "That's weird," he muttered. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and plunged them into total darkness. Rex's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Caleb," Curtis whispered urgently. "Get behind the counter, now." Flashlight beams swept across the windows. Shadows moved outside, at least 3 men. Curtis's heart hammered against his ribs as he heard the scratch of metal on metal at the back door. "They're breaking in," Caleb whispered, voice trembling. Curtis grabbed his emergency flashlight and medical bag. "Stay close to me," he ordered softly. "Rex, heel." The German Shepherd moved silently to his side, body tense and alert. They crept toward the storage room just as the back door burst open with a splintering crack. "Check every room," a harsh voice commanded. Curtis guided Caleb to the small door, hidden behind shelves of medical supplies, his private exit for late-night emergencies. The boy's hand was cold and shaking in his. "When I open this, run straight for the trees." Curtis breathed. "Don't stop. Don't look back." Rain poured down as they slipped outside. The wet grass muffled their footsteps, but shouting erupted behind them as their escape was discovered. "There they are!" Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Curtis pushed Caleb ahead of him, using his body as a shield. They crashed through underbrush, branches whipping their faces. Rex stayed close, his dark fur blending with the shadows. "Stop right there!" someone bellowed. "That dog is private property!" A flashlight beam caught Curtis in the back. He stumbled, nearly falling, but forced himself forward. His lungs burned. Rain streamed down his face, blinding him. "Get the trank gun!" The voice was closer now. "Don't let that mutt get away." Curtis grabbed Caleb's shoulder, steering him sharply left where the ground sloped down. His foot caught on a root, sending pain shooting through his ankle. He bit back a cry. "This way!" Caleb tugged his arm, pointing to a dark opening in the rocky hillside. A small cave, barely visible in the gloom. They squeezed inside just as flashlight beams swept over the area. Curtis pulled Caleb close, holding his breath. Rex pressed against them, silent and watchful. Minutes crawled by. Voices and footsteps passed near their hiding place, then gradually faded into the distance. Still, they didn't move. The cave was cramped but dry, smelling of earth and moss. Caleb's breathing slowly steadied. In the dim light filtering from outside, Curtis saw Rex lay his head on the boy's lap. Caleb's fingers automatically found the dog's ears, scratching gently. "You're safe now," Caleb whispered to Rex. "I won't let them hurt you again." The simple promise, spoken with such fierce conviction, made Curtis's throat tight. He watched as Rex's tail thumped softly against the cave floor, a gesture of trust that seemed miraculous given what the dog had endured. Lightning flashed, illuminating their faces for a moment. Curtis saw the determination in Caleb's eyes, matched by the loyal protectiveness in Rex's stance. These weren't just a boy and a dog anymore. They were survivors, bound together by tonight's terror. The realization hit Curtis like a physical blow. The men hunting them wouldn't simply give up. Rex was evidence that could destroy their operation. They would keep coming, keep hunting, until they either recovered the dog or ensured his silence forever. Rain continued to pour outside their small sanctuary. Curtis's ankle throbbed, and exhaustion weighed on him like lead. But watching Caleb comfort Rex, seeing the trust between them grow stronger with each passing moment, he knew they couldn't give up. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he had to protect them both. The rain drummed steadily against the cave's rocky overhang as Curtis tried to steady his breathing. His ankle throbbed where he'd twisted it during their escape. But his mind was racing even faster than his pulse. Something about Rex's behavior didn't quite add up. The German Shepherd sat alert at the cave's entrance, his posture military straight despite his injuries. Even in the dim light, Curtis could see how Rex's ears twitched at every sound, scanning their surroundings with practiced precision. "Rex," Curtis whispered, testing a hunch. "Position." The dog's response was immediate. Rex moved fluidly into a textbook guard stance, placing himself between them and the cave entrance. It wasn't the random obedience of a pet. This was professional training. Curtis's heart skipped a beat. "Caleb, shine the flashlight on Rex for a moment. Carefully, just enough to see him." The boy aimed the beam low, illuminating Rex's scarred coat. Curtis examined the dog more closely now, looking past the obvious fighting wounds. There, partially hidden under newer scars, he spotted it. a distinctive pattern of white fur on Rex's chest. "Oh my God," Curtis breathed. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, quickly pulling up a news article from 3 months ago. The photo showed a proud German shepherd in police gear, sporting that same white marking. "What is it?" Caleb whispered. "Rex isn't just any dog. He's K947, Officer Hale's partner." Curtis's voice shook. They were both reported dead after a drug bust went wrong. The official report said they went over a cliff during a chase. Bodies never recovered. Caleb's eyes widened. "But Rex is right here." "Exactly." Curtis ran his hand through his wet hair, which means either Rex survived and was stolen, or Officer Hale's death wasn't an accident. Caleb finished quietly. Rex whined softly, as if understanding they were discussing his former partner. Curtis tried another command, one specific to police K9 units. "Rex, evidence search!" The shepherd's head snapped up, nose immediately beginning to work the air in a systematic pattern. Curtis quickly called him back. "Good boy," he murmured, heart heavy. "Stand down." He pulled out his phone again, fingers shaking slightly as he typed a message to Deputy Hayes. "Emergency. Must meet. Rex equals K947, Hale's partner." The response came quickly. "Stay put. Coming with backup, I trust. 1 hour." Curtis leaned back against the damp cave wall, mind spinning. The men pursuing them weren't just brutal dogfighters, they were something far worse. They had somehow acquired a highly trained police dog, probably after killing his handler, and tried to bury that evidence by forcing Rex into their fighting ring. When that failed, they'd tried to dispose of him by dumping him, injured and tagged with a tracker, making it look like an abandoned fighting dog. If Curtis hadn't recognized Rex's training, they killed a police officer. Caleb whispered, horror dawning on his young face. "And they tried to kill Rex too." Curtis nodded grimly. "This goes deeper than dogfighting. These people, they have enough power to cover up a murder and steal a police dog without anyone questioning it." Rex moved closer, pressing against Caleb's side as if trying to comfort him. The boy wrapped his arms around the shepherd's neck. "We won't let them hurt you again," Caleb promised fiercely. "Right, Doctor. Brandt?" Before Curtis could answer, headlights swept across the cave entrance. He tensed, but then recognized Deputy Hayes's distinctive patrol vehicle approach pattern. 3 quick flashes of the lights. Lorna appeared at the cave entrance, rain dripping from her uniform cap. Her face was grim as she crouched down to examine Rex. "It's him, all right," she confirmed quietly. "I'd know that marking anywhere. Hale and Rex were the best K9 team in 3 counties. Her voice caught slightly. John Hale was a good man. He'd been asking questions about some suspicious activity at the Drummond estate before he died. Drummond. Curtis's blood ran cold. As in Richard Drummond, the real estate developer? Lorna nodded. "The same. He owns half the county, has judges and politicians in his pocket. We could never prove anything, but Hale was convinced Drummond's legitimate businesses were covering up something darker." She reached out slowly, letting Rex sniff her hand. The shepherd's tail wagged slightly in recognition of a fellow officer. "Now we have proof," Lorna continued. "Rex is living evidence of whatever Hale discovered, evidence they tried to destroy. And you 3 are the only witnesses who can connect the dots." Curtis felt the weight of that revelation settle over them like a physical presence. They weren't just dealing with local criminals anymore. They were up against wealthy, powerful people who had already proven they would kill to keep their secrets. The rain continued to fall outside their small sanctuary, but the darkness felt deeper now, more threatening. Rex stood at attention between them and the cave entrance, guardian and evidence both, a silent witness to corruption that reached into the very heart of their community. The safe house turned out to be a modest cabin tucked away in the foothills, 20 minutes outside of town. Deputy Lorna Hayes guided their small convoy up the winding dirt road, her patrol car's headlights cutting through the darkness. Curtis followed in his truck, with Caleb and Rex huddled in the back seat. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, with worn furniture and thick curtains covering the windows. A woman sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked up as they entered, her eyes immediately fixing on Rex. "Oh my God," she whispered, standing slowly. "It really is him." "Sarah Hale," Lorna said quietly. "John's widow." Rex's reaction was immediate. His tail began wagging, and he moved forward, nose working the air. Sarah knelt, tears streaming down her face as she buried her hands in the shepherd's fur. "I knew it!" she said fiercely. "I knew they were lying about what happened to John and Rex." Curtis watched the reunion, his throat tight. Caleb stood close to his side, the boy's usual energy subdued by the emotional scene before them. After a few minutes, Sarah composed herself and returned to the table. She pulled out a thick manila envelope from her bag. "John knew he was onto something big," she explained, spreading out papers and photographs across the table. "He started keeping records, making copies, hiding them in different places. The night before he died, he gave me this envelope, said if anything happened to him, I should take it to someone I trusted." Lorna leaned over the documents, her face grim. "Why didn't you bring these to me earlier?" "I was scared," Sarah admitted. "The official investigation wrapped up so quickly, too quickly, and then I started noticing cars following me, strange calls in the middle of the night. I knew if I moved too soon, I'd end up like John." Curtis picked up one of the photographs. It showed an aerial view of what appeared to be an abandoned quarry on private property. Several buildings were circled in red ink. "That's the old limestone quarry on Drummond's land," Lorna explained. "John had been monitoring unusual activity there, vehicles coming and going at odd hours, sounds of dogs fighting." "Silas Drummond?" Curtis felt his stomach drop. "The developer?" Sarah nodded grimly. John discovered Drummond was running more than just real estate deals. The dogfighting ring was just part of it. He used it to launder money from other operations, plus it gave him leverage over powerful people who participated in the fights. Curtis sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. Everyone in town knew Silas Drummond. He was on the hospital board, donated to local charities, showed up at every important community event in his expensive suits and perfectly polished shoes. "Look at this," Caleb said suddenly, pointing to a document. "Bank records. All these transfers to something called Quarry Holdings." Lorna nodded approvingly at the boy's sharp eyes. "Shell company. John traced it back to Drummond. He was getting close to connecting all the pieces when they killed him," Sarah finished, her voice hard. "Made it look like an accident during a pursuit. They must have taken Rex, tried to break him, turn him into just another fighting dog. When that failed, they tried to dispose of the evidence," Curtis concluded. "But they didn't count on Caleb finding him." The boy straightened at this, his chin lifting. "I want to help," he declared. "Rex trusted me when I found him. I can't just walk away now." Curtis started to protest. This was far too dangerous for a child. But something in Caleb's determined expression stopped him. He remembered being that age, finding an injured hawk, and refusing to leave it despite his parents' warnings. That same stubborn certainty that helping was worth the risk. "We'll need to be careful," Lorna said, spreading out a map. "Drummond has half the county officials in his pocket. One wrong move and these files disappear, along with any chance of justice for John." "What about Rex?" Caleb asked, one hand resting protectively on the shepherd's head. "He's proof that Officer Hale was murdered, right?" Sarah nodded. "More than that. Rex was with John during his investigation. He might have seen things, been present during meetings or surveillance. That's why they couldn't just kill him. A dead police dog would raise too many questions. They had to discredit him first, turn him into just another fighting dog that could be disposed of without suspicion." Curtis watched Rex, noting how the shepherd remained alert even while accepting pets from Caleb. Despite everything they'd done to him, they hadn't broken his training or his spirit. "So what's our next move?" he asked, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "We document everything," Lorna replied. "Build an airtight case. I have contacts in the state police who aren't under Drummond's influence, but we'll need to move carefully. He has eyes everywhere in town." "You can stay here," Sarah offered. "The cabin's off the grid, and only Lorna knows about it. John and I used it as a backup plan, just in case." She trailed off, but they all understood. Officer Hale had known the risks he was taking, had prepared for the worst. Now it was up to them to finish what he'd started. Looking around the room, Curtis saw the same resolve reflected in each face, from Sarah's quiet determination to Caleb's youthful courage, from Lorna's professional focus to Rex's steadfast presence. They were an unlikely alliance, brought together by chance and a wounded dog, but now they held the key to exposing a corruption that ran deep through their community. The rain continued to drum on the cabin's roof as they began to plan their next steps, the scattered documents before them painting a picture of wealth and power turned to cruel purposes. Curtis felt his fear mixing with a growing sense of purpose. Drummond might seem untouchable, but they had truth on their side, and a loyal shepherd who had survived against all odds to help bring his partner's killers to justice. "The transmitter's our best shot," Lorna said, spreading blueprints across the cabin's kitchen table. "We can use their own tracking device against them." Curtis studied the small electronic beacon they'd removed from Rex's collar. "You're sure we can reactivate it safely?" "Sarah's got a friend in tech. He modified it. Now we control when it broadcasts." Lorna traced a route on the map. "There's an abandoned warehouse here. Perfect sight lines, multiple exits. We set up cameras, get them on record making threats." Caleb leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "Like a real police sting." "You're staying here with Sarah," Curtis said firmly. The boy started to protest, but Curtis held up his hand. "Rex needs you to guard him. That's the most important job." The shepherd's ears perked up at his name, and he pressed closer to Caleb's side. The bond between them had only grown stronger over the past days. Sarah nodded. "I'll keep them both safe, but Curtis—" She hesitated. "These men, they killed John without hesitation. Are you sure about this?" Curtis wasn't sure at all. His hands trembled slightly as he helped Lorna set up the surveillance equipment. Every shadow seemed to hold threat, but he thought of Rex's scars, of Officer Hale's files, of Caleb's unwavering faith. Sometimes doing the right thing means being scared and moving forward anyway. The warehouse loomed grey and hulking in the pre-dawn light. Curtis and Lorna worked quickly, positioning cameras in shadowed corners while state police officers, trusted ones Lorna had called in, took up hidden positions outside. The transmitter sat innocently on a crate in the center of the space. "Remember," Lorna said, checking her weapon, "let them make the first move. We need clear evidence of threats or admission of crimes." Curtis nodded, his mouth dry. They took their positions and activated the transmitter. The waiting began. Minutes crawled by like hours. Curtis's legs cramped from crouching behind storage shelves. Then, the rumble of engines, heavy footsteps, harsh voices. "Signal's strong. Dog's gotta be in here. Boss wants this wrapped clean, no loose ends this time." 3 men entered, faces Curtis recognized from the clinic attack. They moved with practiced menace, scanning the shadows. The leader picked up the transmitter, scowling. "Looking for something." Lorna stepped out, badge gleaming. Curtis emerged beside her, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Well, if it ain't the do-good deputy." The leader sneered. "This is private property. We're just recovering stolen merchandise." "You mean the police K9 you stole after murdering Officer Hale?" Curtis's voice stayed steady despite his pounding heart. "The one you tried to turn into a fighting dog?" "Careful, vet. Accidents happen to people who stick their noses where they don't belong. Ask Hale's widow." "Is that a threat?" Lorna's hand rested on her holster. "It's a promise. Mr. Drummond doesn't appreciate interference in his business affairs. Hand over the dog, forget what you think you know, or what?" Curtis stepped closer. "More accidents?" More animals brutalized for profit? More families destroyed? The leader's face twisted. You signed your own death warrant, old man. When we're done with you, we'll find that brat who took our dog. Teaching him a lesson will be... Multiple things happened at once. Curtis's fist connected with the man's jaw, surprising them both. Lorna's voice rang out. That's enough! You're under arrest! The state police burst in, weapons raised. In the chaos of arrests and rights being read, Curtis stared at his throbbing hand. He'd never thrown a punch in his life, but the threat to Caleb had ignited something fierce and protective inside him. You okay? Lorna asked later, reviewing the footage. The camera had caught everything. The threats, the admission of Drummond's involvement, the casual mention of murder. Yeah, Curtis flexed his fingers. Think I actually am. This is good evidence. Combined with Hale's files and Rex's injuries, we can move against Drummond himself now. She smiled. You did good today. Hitting him probably wasn't strictly necessary, but it felt right. Curtis finished. For the first time in days, hope flickered in his chest. They had proof now, real evidence that could bring down Drummond's empire of cruelty. Rex could be free, Caleb safe, Officer Hale's killers brought to justice. Back at the cabin, Caleb launched himself at Curtis. Did it work? Did you get them? It worked. Curtis hugged the boy, careful of his sore hand. Rex helped us catch some very bad men. The shepherd padded over, pressing against their legs. His amber eyes seemed to hold understanding of what they'd accomplished. Sarah wiped away tears as Lorna showed her the footage, proof at last of the conspiracy that had killed her husband. Curtis sat heavily in a chair, exhaustion catching up with him. But it was a good tired, the kind that comes from fighting for something worthwhile. He watched Caleb praising Rex, the boy's smile bright enough to chase away shadows. We did it, didn't we? Caleb asked. It's over now? Curtis started to agree, but something held him back. Drummond was still out there, wealthy and connected and dangerous. The evidence was strong, but would it be enough? The victory felt somehow incomplete, like the quiet before a storm. Instead of answering, he pulled Caleb close, one hand resting on Rex's head. For now, in this moment, they were safe. They had won this round. The rest would have to be enough for today. The morning sun painted false promises across the safe house windows. Curtis watched Caleb and Rex playing fetch in the fenced yard, the boys' laughter a balm after days of tension. They'd been careful, deputy patrols, security cameras, scheduled check-ins. Maybe too careful, maybe that had made them complacent. Just 5 more minutes. Caleb called through the screen door, holding up his hand. Rex bounded after the tennis ball, his powerful form moving with renewed grace after proper care and feeding. Okay, but then breakfast. Curtis replied, smiling despite his fatigue. He turned to pour another cup of coffee, letting his guard down for just a moment. The scream shattered everything. Curtis knocked over the mug as he sprinted outside. The fence gate hung open. Rex barked frantically, straining against the training lead they'd used to keep him safely contained. No Caleb, just a tennis ball rolling across empty grass. Caleb! Curtis's voice cracked as he screamed the boy's name. He spun in circles, searching. A black SUV peeled away down the dirt road, too far to chase. His knees gave out. Lorna arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. She found Curtis still kneeling in the wet grass, Rex whining beside him. I should have been watching closer, Curtis whispered. I should have. Don't. Lorna cut him off, but her face was ashen. We'll find him. The burner phone in Curtis's pocket buzzed. Unknown number. His hands shook as he answered. Missing something, Doctor? Drummond's voice oozed satisfaction. Such a brave little boy. Kept calling for you until we convinced him to be quiet. Curtis's throat closed. If you hurt him? That depends entirely on you. Bring the dog to the old Miller barn by noon, alone. Rex for the boy. A simple trade. Refuse. And, well... A muffled whimper carried through the phone. Children are so fragile. The line went dead. Curtis stared at the phone, nausea rising. "We can't give in," Lorna said, but her voice wavered. "Rex's evidence. Without him, the whole case falls apart. Hale's murder, the fighting ring, everything." "He's 11 years old." Curtis hurled the phone against the fence. "A child. And I brought him into this. I let him stay involved because... His voice broke. Because Caleb's determination had awakened something in Curtis, something he'd thought died with his wife. Purpose, hope, the chance to protect instead of just heal. Now that choice might cost Caleb his life. Inside the house, Sarah Hale clutched the files her husband died collecting. "We can't let Drummond win. Mike gave his life." "Mike was a grown man who chose to be a cop," Curtis snapped. "Caleb is an innocent kid who trusted me to keep him safe." Rex pressed against Curtis's leg, whining softly. Those intelligent eyes seemed to understand the weight of the choice. The shepherd had survived brutality, fought his way back from darkness. Now his freedom might cost Caleb everything. "There has to be another way," Lorna insisted. "Let me call in backup. Set up a sting." "In 4 hours?" Curtis laughed bitterly. "With a boy's life at stake? You really think Drummond hasn't planned for that? So we just give up? Let him win?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Let Mike's death mean nothing?" Curtis slumped in a kitchen chair, head in his hands. The weight of impossible choices crushed down. Trade Rex, betray justice, let a murderer walk free. Refuse and carry Caleb's death on his conscience forever. What kind of choice was that? He thought of Caleb's smile, his stubborn bravery, the way he'd refused to abandon Rex even when scared. The boy had shown more courage than Curtis had in years of hiding from life in his clinic. "What would Mike do?" Sarah asked softly. "Mike died," Curtis said. "And now an 11-year-old boy might die too, because I was arrogant enough to think we could win against someone like Drummond, because I let compassion override common sense." Lorna knelt beside his chair. "That compassion is what makes you human. It's why Caleb trusts you, why Rex bonded with you. Don't let Drummond take that too." But Curtis barely heard her. He was lost in memories. Caleb bursting into his clinic that first night, determination outweighing fear. The boy's gentle hands cleaning Rex's wounds. His infectious laugh when the shepherd first wagged his tail. All those moments now tainted by the knowledge that he'd failed to protect their source. Rex's nose nudged Curtis's hand. The shepherd's eyes held steady, as if saying he understood sacrifice. He'd endured torture rather than become what his captors wanted. But could Curtis ask a child to pay that price? 4 hours, he murmured. 4 hours to decide between justice and mercy. He looked at the scattered evidence of their investigation, photos, files, recordings. All meaningless if Caleb died. Sarah touched his shoulder. "We can get more evidence. We can't get another Caleb." "Can we?" Lorna challenged. "How many years has Drummond operated? How many lives destroyed? If we give in now, who else will suffer?" Curtis stared out the window at the abandoned tennis ball, a bright yellow accusation in the morning sun. Somewhere, a terrified boy waited for rescue. Somewhere, a wealthy monster smiled, confident that compassion would prove weaker than cruelty. "I should have protected him," Curtis whispered. The words fell into silence, heavy with guilt and grief and the weight of an impossible choice. Time ticked away, carrying hope with it, while Curtis wrestled with the darkest question he'd ever faced. Could he sacrifice one child to save countless others? Or would that sacrifice destroy whatever humanity he had left? Rex pressed closer, offering warmth against the growing cold in Curtis's chest. But for the first time since that stormy night in the clinic, the shepherd's presence brought no comfort, only the bitter taste of choices that should never have to be made. Curtis stared at the empty tennis ball in the yard, his mind racing through possibilities. Years of veterinary training had taught him to think creatively in crisis. Now, watching Rex's steady movements, an idea began to form. "I know how we can save them both," he said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. Lorna and Sarah turned to him, hope flickering in their exhausted faces. "Rex's training," Curtis continued, his voice growing stronger. "He's not just a fighter, he's a highly disciplined police dog. We can use that." He crossed to his medical bag, fingers running over familiar vials. "I can sedate him, make him appear weak and defeated. Drummond's men won't see a threat." Lorna frowned. "You want to drug him? After everything he's been through?" "A mild sedative only. Enough to make him seem helpless without compromising his abilities." Curtis knelt beside Rex, running gentle hands over the shepherd's scarred coat. "He'll still be aware, still able to act if needed, but Drummond will see exactly what he expects, a broken animal, ready to return to the fighting pits." "It's risky," Sarah warned. "If they realize it's an act, they won't." Curtis's voice carried new conviction. "I'll make sure of it. I'm going in alone, unarmed. They'll be watching for tricks, expecting resistance. Instead, they'll see a defeated veterinarian giving up the fight." "Absolutely not." Lorna stepped forward. "You can't face them alone. Let me position backup." "No." Curtis's tone left no room for argument. "Any sign of law enforcement, and Caleb dies. This has to look real." He met Lorna's worried gaze. "But you can be ready, hidden. Once we confirm Caleb is safe, once their guard is down." Rex whined softly, pressing against Curtis's leg. The shepherd's intelligent eyes seemed to understand, to offer forgiveness for what was coming. Curtis's hands trembled slightly as he prepared the sedative. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered, measuring the dose with practiced precision. "I know you've suffered enough betrayal, but I promise, this is the last time anyone uses you as a weapon." The injection was quick, gentle. Rex accepted it with unwavering trust, and Curtis felt his heart crack. How many times had this loyal animal been betrayed by those he trusted? Yet here he was, still willing to believe in human kindness. As the sedative took effect, Rex's movements grew sluggish, his proud bearing diminishing. Curtis watched the transformation with a mixture of guilt and determination. The powerful police dog seemed to fade, leaving behind the appearance of a broken fighter, exactly what Drummond would expect. 3 hours until the exchange," Lorna said quietly. "I'll position our people well hidden. But Curtis," she gripped his arm, "don't take unnecessary risks. Drummond is ruthless. He won't hesitate to kill you both if he suspects anything." Curtis nodded, his focus on Rex's breathing, monitoring the sedative's effects. "I know, but he's also arrogant. He expects people to break under pressure, to choose self-preservation over principle. That's his weakness." Sarah handed him the burner phone they'd use for coordination. "Mike always said arrogance makes criminals sloppy, makes them underestimate their opponents." Let's hope he's right. Curtis gathered his medical bag, including only what would seem natural for a surrendering vet. No weapons, nothing suspicious. Everything had to support the image of defeat. The next hours passed in tense preparation. Curtis reviewed the plan repeatedly, adjusting Rex's sedation, memorizing the meeting location. Lorna argued for additional backup, but Curtis remained firm. Any sign of law enforcement would spook Drummond's men. "Your priority is Caleb," he told her. "Once you confirm he's safe, then move in." Not before. He didn't voice the obvious, that he might not survive that long. Some prices were worth paying. As sunset approached, Curtis loaded Rex into his truck. The shepherd moved slowly, believably subdued. Looking at him, no one would suspect the razor-sharp awareness still present behind those drooping eyes. "Ready, boy?" Curtis whispered, scratching Rex's ears. The tail thumped once, weakly, but the intelligence in those amber eyes remained clear. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The drive to the meeting point was silent, heavy with purpose. Curtis's hands were steady on the wheel, his fear transformed into cold resolve. He'd spent years hiding from life after his wife's death, refusing to engage with anything that might hurt him. Now, facing the very real possibility of his own death, he felt strangely peaceful. Drummond's men had chosen an abandoned grain storage facility, remote, multiple exits, plenty of shadows to hide their intentions. Curtis parked where instructed, in the harsh glare of mounted floodlights. Rex lay quietly in the back, the picture of defeated submission. "Showtime!" Curtis murmured, stepping out with his hands raised. The night air carried the scent of rain and rusted metal. Somewhere in the darkness, he knew Lorna's team waited, but he felt utterly alone. Headlights blazed to life, momentarily blinding him. Curtis heard car doors open, footsteps on gravel. He kept his hands visible, maintaining the role of the surrendering veterinarian. "Where's the boy?" His voice carried clearly in the night air. "Where's our property?" A harsh voice answered. Curtis recognized one of the men from the clinic break-in. "In the truck, sedated for transport, as requested." Curtis's tone was carefully professional, hiding his rage at their casual cruelty. "Let me see Caleb first." A pause, then another set of headlights illuminated a different area. Curtis's heart clenched at the sight of Caleb, pale but apparently unharmed, held firmly by one of Drummond's men. "Satisfied?" The first man stepped closer, his smile ugly. "Now hand over the dog." Curtis moved to the truck, every motion deliberate. Rex lifted his head slightly, maintaining the act of drug-induced weakness. Together, they walked into danger, trusting in each other and the plan they'd set in motion. "I'm sorry," Curtis whispered, too softly for their captors to hear. But Rex's ear twitched slightly, acknowledging the apology, the trust, the desperate gamble they were both taking. With each step toward Drummond's men, Curtis felt the weight of his choice. Everything hinged on timing now, on Rex's training, on Lorna's positioning, on Drummond's arrogance. One mistake would cost them all their lives, but watching Caleb's brave attempt to hide his fear, Curtis knew he'd made the only choice possible. Sometimes victory meant appearing to surrender, meant walking unarmed into danger, meant trusting that justice would prevail, even when darkness seemed to win. Rex's warm presence beside him steadied his nerves as they approached the exchange point. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Man and dog, both choosing to risk everything for something greater than themselves. The grain facility's floodlights cast harsh shadows across the gravel lot as Curtis led Rex toward Drummond's men. Every step felt like walking through molasses, time stretching thin with tension. Behind him, he could hear Caleb's muffled protests and the rough laughter of his captors. A sleek black sedan pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Silas Drummond emerged, straightening his expensive suit with casual arrogance. His silver hair gleamed as he approached, a shark's smile spreading across his face. "Dr. Brandt?" Drummond called out, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Such a pleasure to finally meet the man who's caused me so much trouble." He gestured at Rex. "I see you've decided to be reasonable." Curtis kept his expression neutral, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I just want the boy safe." Of course. Drummond circled them slowly, examining Rex with predatory interest. Beautiful animal. Such a waste to let him rot in some backwater clinic. He reached down to grab Rex's muzzle, studying the old scars. "He made me quite a fortune in his day." Rex remained limp, perfectly playing his drugged role. Curtis watched Drummond's growing satisfaction, counting the seconds in his head. The sedative would be wearing off any moment now. "Release Caleb!" Curtis demanded, his voice steady despite his fear. That was the deal. Drummond laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls. "The deal?" "Doctor, surely you understand business better than that. Rex here is evidence of some rather unfortunate activities. I'm afraid none of you can leave." He nodded to his men, who drew their weapons. Curtis's blood ran cold as he saw one grab Caleb roughly by the arm. The boy's eyes went wide with terror. "Now then," Drummond continued, reaching for Rex's collar. Let's see what condition you've kept my champion in. Rex's eyes snapped fully open. In one explosive motion, the shepherd lunged upward, powerful jaws clamping onto Drummond's reaching arm. The businessman screamed, staggering backward as chaos erupted. "Caleb, down!" Curtis shouted, diving toward the boy as gunshots cracked through the air. He tackled Caleb behind a stack of rusted barrels just as bullets sparked off metal where they'd been standing. Rex was a fury of motion, years of police training coming alive as he took down one gunman after another. The shepherd moved like liquid shadow, each attack precise and devastating. Drummond's men, expecting an injured animal, found themselves facing a highly trained K-9 officer instead. "Police, drop your weapons!" Lorna's voice boomed across the lot as flashlights blazed from multiple directions. Her team had been waiting in position, and now they swarmed in from all sides. Curtis held Caleb close, shielding him with his body as more shots rang out. He felt the boy trembling against him, but noted with pride that Caleb wasn't crying, just breathing hard and staying focused like they'd practiced. "It's okay," Curtis whispered. "We've got you. You're safe now." Through gaps in the barrels, they watched the scene unfold. Rex had Drummond pinned, the businessman's expensive suit now torn and muddy as he tried to crawl away. Lorna approached with her weapon drawn, backup officers securing the other men. "Silas Drummond," she announced clearly. "You're under arrest for organized crime, animal cruelty, kidnapping, and conspiracy to murder Officer Michael Hale." She pulled out a thick envelope. "We have your financial records, witness statements, and DNA evidence linking you to Hale's death. It's over." Drummond's face contorted with rage. "You have nothing! I own this town! Not anymore!" Lorna cut him off, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. "We've been building this case for months. Your entire operation is exposed." As other officers led away Drummond's men, Curtis finally felt safe enough to stand, helping Caleb to his feet. Rex trotted over to them, tail wagging slightly as he checked them both for injuries. The shepherd's training was evident in how he remained alert, even while showing affection. "You did good, boy," Curtis said softly, scratching Rex's ears. "Both of you did." He looked at Caleb, who managed a shaky smile. "I knew you'd come," the boy said, his voice stronger than Curtis expected. "I knew you wouldn't let them win." Emergency vehicles began arriving, their lights painting the scene in rotating red and blue. Paramedics checked everyone for injuries, while evidence teams documented the scene. Curtis watched as Drummond was led away, his empire crumbling in real time as news crews gathered at the perimeter. Lorna joined them, holstering her weapon. "We got them all," she reported. "The evidence from Hale's widow broke the case wide open. Once we started pulling threads, Drummond's whole operation unraveled." "Will it stick?" Curtis asked, thinking of Drummond's money and influence. "Oh yeah." Lorna smiled grimly. "We've got paper trails, witnesses turning state's evidence, everything. He's done." As the chaos of the arrest scene gradually settled, Curtis felt something shift inside him. The weight of grief he'd carried since his wife's death seemed lighter somehow. He looked at Caleb, brave and resilient despite his fear, and at Rex, who had trusted him enough to play their dangerous game perfectly. They gave their statements to investigators, Caleb describing his kidnapping with remarkable clarity. Curtis noticed the boy stood taller now, pride replacing his former timidity. Sometimes courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about doing what was right despite your fear. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky, they finally headed home. Rex rode in the back seat, head held high, while Caleb dozed against the window. Curtis drove carefully, aware of how precious his passengers were. The clinic looked different in the morning light. Or maybe he was the one who had changed. Curtis unlocked the doors, letting them all inside. The familiar smells of antiseptic and animal bedding welcomed them home. "What happens now?" Caleb asked sleepily, as Curtis helped him settle onto the break room couch. Curtis looked at Rex, who had already claimed his favorite spot by the desk. "Well, I think we have room for a clinic mascot. and his best friend needs a part-time job after school if he's interested. Caleb's face lit up. Really? You mean it? Really? Curtis smiled, feeling more certain with each passing moment. We make a good team, all of us. He began his morning routine, checking on overnight patients while Rex padded alongside him. Through the windows, he could see people arriving for the day's appointments. Life was returning to normal, but normal itself had changed. Curtis wasn't just a caretaker anymore. He was someone who had fought back against cruelty and won. The loss of his wife would always be part of him, but it no longer defined his future. Here, with Rex's warm presence beside him and Caleb's youthful energy filling the clinic, he had found something he thought he'd lost forever: purpose, connection, and the courage to live fully again. The morning sun streamed through the windows as Curtis prepared for his first patient. Rex sat alertly by his side, both of them transformed by their journey together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, vet, boy, and dog, bound by loyalty, justice, and the healing power of compassion. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.